After months of keeping my head low, I wound up in solitary confinement, and it may have been the worst thing to ever happen to me. In the limited space and close walls of my cell, all I could do was think. As I rubbed along my swollen eye, I thought about the circumstances that brought me to this place. I killed someone. There was no getting around that fact. It didn't matter that I was drunk or that it was an accident. I did something horrible and deserved to be here. When I found out I was going to prison, I vowed to stay out of trouble as best as I could. I tried making friends and hanging out with the more passive prisoners. Although I missed everything about life outside, I managed to establish a routine I was content with. I hoped that I could fly under the radar through my sentence and be a better person once I was free again. Then a punch ruined that. A fight broke out in the cafeteria. One of my buddies fell into the fray and started getting pummeled. Without thinking, I rushed in to help him get out. As I pushed a body off of him and pulled him away, I felt a blow to my back. I swung back before I could get a good look at the guy and realized that I punched a guard in the face. "I'm sorry." I tried to apologize and explain. In an instant, I felt the side of my face light up with pain as another guard hit me. I fell to the ground and his full weight pinned me. There was no getting out of this one. They brought me to solitary confinement for hitting a guard. Once that got around, all of the officers looked at me with disdain. Another accident had made things even worse. After a few days, I was released, shaken up by how the loneliness gripped me. Everyone who knew me could see the difference it made. Before I knew it, I was back in solitary confinement for disrespecting a guard. Over time, they found more minor reasons to put me back in that box of a room. I saw less and less of my friends. Days turned to weeks and months. Initially, I thought isolation wouldn't be too bad, but after months, the loneliness was killing me. I couldn't think straight. The interactions with other people were kept to a minimum, and they were usually from hostile guards. To pass the time, I tried remembering my life. I tried remembering everything from the beginning, hoping that I could pass the time that way. But those memories slipped through my fingers. I needed to talk with someone. Then, it happened. One day, out of nowhere, I noticed writing on the wall. It was small, as if whoever wrote it didn't want it to be seen. The hidden message read, "Hello." Unsure of what to do, I said hello out loud. I realized that I was probably losing it, talking out loud to a word on the wall. A loud sigh escaped my lips. I thought about how I was probably losing it. The thought crossed my mind that I was experiencing some kind of hallucination. I looked back up and saw there were more words. They said that I wasn't crazy and that I didn't need to feel alone here. My thoughts drifted back to my friends here and life outside of the prison. Once again, I resolved to make it through this so I could be a better person and enjoy those things again. I looked again and the writing on the wall continued. It said that as long as I remained in that room, I would have someone to talk to. It said that I could get through this and make it back to life on the outside. So I spent hours talking to the walls. I'd look away, then come back to new words. Time was something that slipped my mind completely. It didn't matter if I was there for hours or years. I no longer felt alone. Eventually, the guards notified me that I was being released. They brought me out and took me through the processing area. My old clothes felt different. They were scratchy and irritating. When I saw people's faces and tried to talk to them, I struggled with my words. I struggled even more grasping what people said to me. On the outside, it was even worse. Everything felt so alien. When I searched for the one comfort that got me through prison, I never found it. Even after isolating myself again on the outside, I could never find the writing on the wall. I had worked at the state penitentiary for over a year, and I began to notice a change in the prisoners and myself. A new policy made it so that we ended up putting more prisoners in solitary confinement. That was done to minimize violence and any expenses that came from that. The other guards got really loose with the new policy, putting prisoners away for minor offenses. They put people in solitary confinement for looking at them funny, talking back in any way, and anything else they didn't like. I had done some research on the effects of solitary confinement out of curiosity. Before I knew it, I was diving down the rabbit hole of psychological and social effects. I began to worry what might happen to the prisoners if they kept getting put in solitary long term. Even though they had gotten locked up, they were still people. Over the next few months, I tried to pay attention to the prisoners that were going in. One of the guys who was constantly put in isolation was Martinez. He was a big dude who stood at around 6'4". That was probably the most intimidating thing about him. He was more of a joker and trash talker than anything else. He wasn't violent, but he wouldn't take guff from anyone. That included the guards. When he poked back at some of the guards for hurling insults his way, they put him in the box. After months, there was a noticeable difference. Martinez was much more withdrawn when he was back in with the general population. He avoided any eye contact and rarely spoke. Even then, guards found reasons to send him and other prisoners to isolation. I brought them things to try and ease the punishment of confinement. I brought books, notebooks, and pencils. Still, they continued to change for the worse. Over those months, changes in myself became evident too. After dealing with everyone in isolation, I felt pretty numb to everything on the outside. Orders were harder to follow. I felt less compelled to offer up my own thoughts and opinions in conversations. This carried over outside of work, and my relationships began to suffer. I don't know if it was empathy or something else, but I felt like I was dealing with that isolation too. I came into work one day and heard the guards talking about how difficult the people in solitary were getting. That woke me out of my haze, and I asked them to catch me up. Apparently, it was starting to get to a point where the prisoners in isolation were less responsive. Guards would have to give them orders several times before they complied. It was scary hearing how isolation was ruining them. The start of my shift went as it normally did. Since the new policies were implemented, violent incidents in the prison were down. After an uneventful few hours, I was called in to deliver meals to the confined prisoners. I pushed the food cart and found my way to that wing of the prison. Out of curiosity, I looked in each room before sliding the food trays through the door slots. When I got to the last one, a wave of dread came over me. I peeked into the cell, and what I saw got burned into my memory. After calling for backup and medical staff, I opened the cell door. Inside, Martinez sat lifeless on his bed. Blood stained the room and pooled around the bed. A gash in his neck and a bloody pencil in his hand told me what happened. I watched as the staff loaded him onto the gurney. This place broke him down. It was breaking me down. I could never explain what possessed me to stab another inmate and get myself locked up in solitary confinement. Even then, I don't think I could have explained my motivations. Something inside me just told me I needed to get put in isolation. I needed to return to the safety of the small cell. After dropping the blade and watching the blood pour from his wound, I was grabbed and put in cuffs. Before long, they uncuffed me and shoved me into a cell that couldn't have been much bigger than a closet. After they shut the door and I was alone, it felt like the walls began to close in further. There was nothing to do, so I sat on the bed and waited. That was all I could do. I waited and waited, unsure of how much time passed. It usually took a while before I heard them. Finally, it happened, and I began hearing the voices in my head again. They were like whispers, quiet enough that I had to concentrate to hear them. Over time, they got louder, but they remained hushed like whispers. They praised my violent actions. They offered some sense of comfort and company in the small void the prison called a cell. Through the isolation, the voices helped me fend off the pain of loneliness. Sometimes I could respond to them out loud, and they would whisper back. The conversations helped stave off those feelings of isolation. I would listen and converse with the voices until the guards eventually brought me out to rejoin the general population. The whispers would fade, and then I would feel alone. I struggled when it came to conversations with actual people. No one talked to me like they did, or offered the same comfort. Somehow, they put me at ease. When they faded completely, I was determined to make my way back to solitary confinement, so I could hear them again. That meant getting violent again. I was determined to get back and stay there, so I could enjoy the isolation properly. It had to be bad enough to get me locked in the box for a long time. That would get the voices talking even more. By the next day, I had put my plan into action. When the guards came by our cell to do their rounds, they found me standing outside, alone. My cellmate's body remained inside. They pressed me against the wall and questioned me. The violence wasn't new, but it seemed to shock them. I answered their questions honestly and found relief when they brought me to solitary confinement. "Guess you're getting what you want, inmate. We're going to keep you here for life." Once the cell door closed behind me, I sat on the bed and smiled. I was in the safety of the small cell again. The threats and actions of other prisoners were no longer a concern to me. I'd have the voices again too. As I had done several times before, I waited for them, not knowing how long it would take. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, they came back. Only this time, they were different. Even though they were still whispers, the voices were more shrill and irritating. That wasn't the worst part. Instead of offering me the usual comfort and conversation, they tormented me. It made me painfully aware of everything I had done to get here. Since then, I've tried to get out and get them to stop. Neither has worked.